Okay, I'm going to move our conversation along now just to the sort of final area that we were hoping to cover today, which was this question around the support and training that teachers need in order to be able to do some of this work and have these conversations about diversity. I know this is something that's coming up in the questions among our participants. Should we not be educating educators about unconscious bias, including their own attitudes to society? I suppose bearing in mind that quite a lot of science teachers won't be social scientists, what do we think we have to do to enable them to have these conversations? We'll turn that out to our panel. Emma, fire away.
This is something that we've been looking at quite a lot. And I think we've talked before about the idea of being able to have open, honest conversations. And I know various people have talked about the fact that we as teachers don't always feel like we are knowledgeable enough to have the conversations, or are so frightened of having the wrong conversation that we can make matters worse. So there is an issue around initially creating a culture that allows that conversation to happen, and now ideally that's coming from school governance, but it might not be, and it might be something that you want to pick up within your own department. And if that is something that you want to sort of drive forward, start the conversation with your own teams in terms of what do we want to talk about, what are the hard questions we want to ask, what do we feel that we don't know, and then looking for places where we can signpost those staff to find that out, and then come back together and keep reflecting. Now, that in terms of CPD, I don't think we do that well enough in terms of initial teacher training. I don't think we talk about diversity of representation in initial science teacher training. But, you know, certainly for those of us who are further in our careers, we have a space perhaps to think about where we can develop CPD. And that might be about training around teaching difficult or problematic people in terms of the context around it. It might be looking at the inclusivity of the language we use. We teach a lot of topics which have overlaps with diversity, and we need to think carefully about the language used within that context. But also it might be, and this has been touched on a lot from the whole panel today, how do we include different people, not our typical people, to ensure that we're doing that. And that's three quite big strands of CPD, and there isn't a great deal out there to support you. I'll be really honest with you in terms of there isn't somewhere you can just go and they will just tell you that. So it might be something that you need to develop as your own community, and you want your staff in your community to share their own lived experience. And if you develop a culture where these things are being talked about, they will, and you'll often find those expertise within your wider community that will really help you grow and share and develop your curriculum because of that.
Brilliant. Jess, do you want to come in on this question?
Yeah, I've got a few points to make on this. Completely agree everything Emma's just said. You know, it's not just a one-off piece of training isn't going to solve the issue. It needs to be an ongoing discussion. And I mean, we found that really, you know, there needs to be SLT buy-in within the school for this, and it needs to be not just within the science department. The conversation needs to be across the whole school, including parents, school governors. Everybody needs to be talking about bias, about diversity, and looking across subjects across the whole school. In terms of specifically within the classroom, there is some evidence that bias exists, particularly around questioning. This is something that one of our previous projects has found out, that, you know, boys are more likely to put their hands up, ask questions, get involved, and teachers are more likely to respond to that than girls. But obviously that is a generalisation, but it's just something that we've picked up. And also within the science department, subject-specific CPD we found to be really important for physicists, and it's almost an indirect consequence. So, you know, if non-specialists do have that support, like for example from our SPN project, we found that there was an increase in the number of students from pupil premium choosing A-level physics of 46%. as well as for girls 45% increase. So it's supporting those teachers with the subject, with their subject knowledge and engaging ways of teaching and inclusive ways of teaching, but also a whole school look at diversity and the messages that are out there.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, one of the things that sort of strikes me about this is this question of you point out some of these statistics around boys being picked more often with their hands up. That's something that we might hear as a stat about how much as an individual teacher are you able to really have the space to reflect on your own practice and whether that's happening in your classroom. If so, what's your response to it? Is it there's something wrong with the girls, or is it there's something I need to change about how I am doing this teaching? Definitely there are sort of anti-racist teaching principles that are getting here a lot of from the United States, which kind of focus on this question of reflecting on the way that you are teaching and what can be done to make that more accessible. Can we hear from Henna and then Mary, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the comments about unconscious bias, and also I noticed there's a question about resources for contemporary scientists as well, which we kind of touched on in our discussions. But I was just thinking, actually, I don't think we have anything specific around contemporary scientists. There are scientists that are doing things at the moment, because there must be so much out there that we can quite easily put together for schools to help have these conversations. But it's not just giving people a list of names. I think the other point is around giving people a narrative as well around talking about various people, so that using the diversity angle, so trying to make sure that we're giving teachers the tools, if you like, to be able to confidently talk about it. And I think that will really, really help. So we can definitely look at producing something like that and then integrating it into the curriculum.
Mary?
Just going back to what Emma said about collaborating in your department, and thinking as well about a point Henna made about perceptions amongst boys and girls about whether science is collaborative. And a lot of the teachers that I work with, they say we've got especially in secondary, especially in exam years, got this content-heavy curriculum, and we've got this, problem that there's a perception it's fact-based. So in that conversation, also look at how can you change the culture of the way science is taught, and, making sure that you include some collaborative activities, some problem solving, to try to shift that perception and to try to model what the culture of science is like within a science lesson. I think that's really important. And I appreciate the thing about the content heavy and how do we find time, but my experience is if you can engage students in those activities, they get more interested in the science, they become better at being independent learners, so you can kind of spin it so that they do more work for themselves. So there's that aspect. There was something else I was going to say and I've forgotten, so I shall be quiet.
I just wanted to add to Mary's point, actually, because it's not just about making it collaborative in the classroom, because actually these are the skills that are needed when these young people are going to go out to work. These are the things that we spend our lives doing on our daily basis. So they're not wasted skills. And actually, it's these skills that really allow the individuals to succeed in their jobs and roles going forward. So, these are life skills, actually, that, that collaboration, the problem solving, working together towards that common goal, that is so important that we get right and start kind of embedding some of these disciplines in when they're young.
Fantastic. Mary, have you recalled your point?
Yeah, sorry. Payel's actually led into it really nicely. The WISE campaign, Women into Science and Engineering, have done some work looking at girls' perception of jobs, and they've identified that instead of talking about what you do in a job, if you can talk about what kinds of personality traits and skills are useful in a job, that's much more accessible to girls and gets them much more interested. And I think actually also when we're looking at other underrepresented groups, those kinds of approaches might be helpful. So again, that's an argument for, please try to fit in your problem solving and your collaboration and be brave enough to move to a different way of teaching if you're not already.
Brilliant, thank you. So I feel like that collaboration point is a really good point. Ade is flagging to me in the private presenter chat some ideas like including an RSS feed from engaging science websites within your virtual learning environment to kind of help bring through different ideas into your teaching. Just in terms of some of those, we've spoken about giving teachers some of the tools that they need to have these conversations, to reflect on their own practice, make sure it's inclusive of diversity. Just in kind of the last 5 minutes that we have of this conversation, has anyone got any thoughts on what those tools actually need to look like? What do teachers need in order to be able to do this work? What does that practically look like? Yes, fire away.
Okay, so I think teachers have a lot going on in the classroom. There's trying to fit everything into the lesson. It's got to be things that are already there. So and working with what already exists. So it's about sort of having things, if you are looking at your scheme of work, making sure those links and those resources are already embedded in the scheme of work. So there's no sort of like, oh yeah, I remember that great resource, and having to find it when when your lesson's about to start. It's about having the systems and everything in place already, and also about teachers being given the space and the capacity to be able to do this and to be able to have those conversations in department time, and again that's that support from senior leaders in the school to be able to provide that space for conversation and working on those schemes of work and engaging with parents.
That's a very good point. I suppose yes, for any SLT listening to this, that in-department time point feels like it's quite an important one. Henna, do you want to come in on this, and then Emma?
Yeah, just quickly, just picking up on what Jess said about embedding it into the curriculum. I think I'd mentioned this earlier as well, but it's just teachers are ridiculously busy. They have so much pressure on their time, especially at the moment. And I think anything we can do to make it easy for them. And from the conversation today, the main takeaway that I've got is actually there is so much information out there, and there's so much advice, and there are so many schemes and so many things that teachers can do. But I think a lot of it is actually finding that and making it easy, kind of like a one-stop place for everyone to be able to find that information easily. So I think if we have something like, so we obviously have schemes of work at Pearson, if we can try and integrate these sorts of projects or the kind of the guides, those sorts of things into our schemes of work, then I think that would make it really, really easy. So then you can just say, here's a lesson, this is what this links to this. Oh, and by the way, there's all these amazing resources and these ambassadors that you can draw on virtually in this world maybe, and then take it from there. Because I think time is precious for teachers, so anything we can do to help support that is going to be well received.
I completely agree. I strongly believe that if you can make the space and time for people to talk about this, we've embedded all of this in our curriculum, and we have in our teacher guidance, we have advice about how to teach particular topics so that people know what to do, but also links to organisations where they can get further information if they want to go and research it further. I think one thing I wanted to say is, if we can get this right, and we do get the climate right in our own schools, what it does do is it allows those members of staff who have protected characteristics to be open with their students and role model on a daily basis with them. And I think that's possibly one of the most important things about going on a journey like this, is you do enable the people that your young people come in contact with every day to share their own personal experiences and actually be able to talk about it without having to go out to industry, without having to go out to external organisations, and actually feel confident that they are supported in having those conversations with the young people.
That's such an important point. I think that if you're not using the full diversity of your teachers, of the people that your children are coming into contact with, you're definitely missing out on a trick in this. And enabling them to feel free to do that is such an important point. I'm being flagged that we're finishing up in 5 minutes, so I think it's important we do wrap up at this stage. But I think, yes, that point around ensuring that we are doing things within existing schemes of work, not adding too much additional strain on teachers is absolutely vital. Just to flag that there's a lot of work going on in Pearson. Forza are doing some of that work with them at the moment on how they make all of their editorial content across all of the different strands of work accessible, what some of the overarching rules are to make that happen effectively. I think that that is obviously a key part of what they can do on this point around on the resources that they provide. So I think we probably need to wrap up at this stage. We've got a couple of final questions which I think work well as wrap-up ones, and those are from our participants. One says, I'd like to do some projects related to STEM and improving inclusion. Are there funding streams available I can apply to? And one says, working in a school where there's huge diversity, economic factors are known to affect our students, how can we get involved in some of these projects? So I guess just if there's a couple of people who want to chime in with how to get involved and how to get some of this work going based on the work that you're doing, that would be great.
Yeah, I think if there's a follow-up to the sessions today, and we could just include links and kind of reference points, but I think Hannah's point's really valuable. There's so much information out there, and I think our job as a collective and others is to kind of make this as easy to access and signposting straightforward. So it'd be really good to kind of do some of that off this session to bring that together and say, here's some access to resources and ways to do these things and supporting. And kind of one of the elements that we always have is the industry link. So some areas that's easier than others, but we will always work to have an industry link in terms of what we do. So yeah, if we could bring some of that together post this for the teachers, that would be great.
Fantastic. So I think the follow-up emails will definitely share the available resources through Pearson. I'm sure we'll contribute to ensuring that covers as many bases as possible for all of the people who are viewing this discussion. Okay, so I'm going to bring it to a close now. Just to sort of quickly recap. So in terms of the conversation around role models, really valuable. It felt to me like the two key things there with this point around context for the historical role models that we're using, and the contemporariness of the those coming in from industry, those that we talk about. Can we find more modern examples of role models that we can use, and what are some of the ways that we can effectively do that? I think when we're talking about outreach, some sort of really good ideas about getting into parents and how we can support them, and what we can do to make it easier for people within education settings to access some of that support. And then when we talk about the discussion and support for training for teachers, reflects on the fact that teachers have limited time and resources. So what can we do to make everything fit into the work that they're already doing, and bring those resources together for them as effectively as possible. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up now. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot and really enjoyed the conversation. And just to finally say to all of our participants, please do fill in the feedback forms. It's so valuable to hear what you thought of the session. That's really appreciated by all of our panelists and by Pearson. So thank you very much, everyone.